So we're going to talk about nutrition, and I'm going to talk about it from the Ayurvedic perspective, which is a little bit different than Western medicine. It's a little different than pretty much everything else. And I love that about Ayurveda is that it offers something that's a little different flavor. And I had a recent discussion with a friend of mine um, about the terminology diets and how in the Western world it's become this huge fad. Like, what diet are you on? And it's like pretty much anything you put into your body is considered part of your diet, whether it's healthy food or unhealthy food. And we just kind of joke about that because we get fatigued by the whole diet thing and how hard it's pushed, like this diet and this diet. And really, there are some rules to eating. And I follow the Ayurvedic rules the best that I can. I'm not perfect. I'm still practicing. This is a practice, a constant practice. I do enjoy some foods, like pizza once in a while, that kind of thing. But I make it a treat, not something that I have all the time. And different seasons, we eat different kinds of foods. So on the bottom here, you can I have time. So time of day, time of season, and time of life play a part in what our body is able to digest or handle for food also. Time of life shouldn't play as much of a part, but our digestive system tends not to be as good as we age. So as we age, we get more, our digestive system tends to be a little more stagnant. Not everybody's, but certain constitutions will definitely be a little bit different. Okay, so the focuses for today is we're going to talk about the 4 keys to healthy living. I'll break those down just a little bit. It's a whole nother huge topic, and I teach that in my program course on Ayurveda and on healthy lifestyle. So it's more specific in that, but I'll just touch base so you kind of have an idea of what they are. We'll talk about weak digestion, which is called weak Agni. We'll talk about how to strengthen your Agni, the do's and don'ts, the importance of moving your body, the healing power of food. We will skim across the tastes and how they're important, and then what a Sattvic diet is. So we're going to cover things fairly quickly and just a little bit of each to give you an idea. But I want you to first write down the Ayurvedic clock, since that's what I base everything that I teach off of this clock right here. So draw the circle, and X to the center, and then a line to half it. And then put noon, 2, 6, 10, midnight, 10 p.m., 6 p.m., 10 a.m. Ha, that should be 6 a.m. We'll fix that. So 6 a.m. We got a lot of PMs. I guess I'm thinking about going to bed or something, or winding down, who knows. But 6 a.m., 10 a.m. Wow, Cami, how about we put this as 2 a.m. What was I thinking about? I was dancing to some really cool music while I was writing this. 2 a.m. Okay, so the 2's and the 2's, the 10's and the 10's, the 6's and the 6's, noon, midnight. Okay, so write down on the clock what time you eat your breakfast, what time you eat your noon meal, and what time you eat supper. Okay, and then if you have any snacks, go ahead and put those in there. So we'll just cover this a little bit. I have plenty of other lectures that cover it in much more detail. Also put what time you go to bed and wake up, and what time you exercise. These are just nice things to kind of bounce off of because they give us information about where we're at and maybe some of the habits that we need to change along the way. Nutrition is important. What you eat is important, but the timing is even more important. And I'll explain more as we go along. So first thing I want to talk about is the 4 keys to healthy living. And the 4 keys are dosha, dhatus, agni, and malas. So I'll go through them and explain what each of them are just a little bit. So the doshas are both the external environment, so the seasons, the time of day, time of year, time of life. Those things are the external, and they affect us. So they affect the food that we should eat. They affect the things and practices that we should do. And then we have the dosha, or what we call constitution, that's within us. And we have all 3 constitutions, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. We have all 3 of them because we need them in order to be able to function. So Vata is that which moves things. It moves things in our body. Anything that moves in our body, including moving our body, is Vata. And then we have Kapha, anything that holds or creates stability. So our bones are actually considered vata as a structure because they're very holy, they're very porous. So our muscles and our fat are considered more kapha-like. And then pitta is that would digest things. So transforming things into energy or whatever needs to be, however needs to be digested. So fit on a physical level, obviously, and then on a mental, emotional level also. So digesting our thoughts and digesting what we take into our body. So those are the doshas. Then we have the malas. The malas would be urination, our bowel movement, and then sweating. So the way that our body gets rid of things, gets rid of toxins specifically. This is very important because if our body doesn't get rid of toxins properly, what happens is our body then accumulates them. And in Ayurveda, we call it ama. It would be that white junk that's on your tongue in the morning, that's ama. If you see it in other part of your digestive system or it comes through your skin like yeast, that's another form of ama buildup. You can also see it in your bowel movements. It'll be a mucousy type stuff. That's accumulation within the body. And this happens when our body is not releasing some of these malas properly. Then we have the dhatus. So there's 7 dhatus, and this is how we look at the systems of the body. So we'll kind of clump them as like the systems. They're actually our tissues, but they would be considered in Western medicine the systems. We don't use the same systems. They're a little bit different. And each one feeds the next one. So the first one's the plasma. It goes to blood. It goes to muscle, fat, bone, nervous system, reproductive system, and then the finest quality is ojas, which is the reproductive tissue. So even more specific in the life vitality. So it feeds those systems, and it takes about 30 days to feed all the way down to the reproductive system, because it's that fine of a material. It gets finer and finer as it gets down to the other systems. So we look at this. If that material can't continue to digest, then we run into issues in the systems that are further along, like the reproductive system, the nervous system, bone density, that kind of stuff, if our body is not being fed properly. So this is where nutrition really comes in handy. If you're eating good foods and your body can digest them, then your finer tissues get fed. If you eat really poor quality foods, the reproductive system and some of those later systems, the nervous system, don't get fed properly. And then ojas, which is our immune system and our vitality, doesn't get fed at all. And that's pretty significant considering we've got some, it's cold and flu season, and also, we are in some sort of pandemic. So we want to make sure that our immune system is running properly. And then that has to do with the lymphatic system and a whole nother cascade of things. And then we have, of course, Agni. So Agni is our digestive fire. So Agni translates as fire in a sense, but our digestive fire specifically we'll talk about. So it's how our body digests food. It's not whether or not you have a high metabolism or low metabolism. It's how it processes that food. So people can have a high metabolism and it can be just jacked up to the point where it's creating too much heat in the body. So the heat goes up, and that creates acid reflux, heartburn, that kind of thing. And then you can have issues going downward. So that's a panavayu, downward movement of energy. And this is where you have constipation, bloating, gas. So all of these things can play a part if your digestion isn't balanced. And these constitutions, these doshas help for this, because kapha helps to bring the liquid to be able to digest food. And vata brings the energy to be able to move the food. So can you see how the constitutions all play a part? Each individual constitution is different. So all of us are a little bit different makeup of vata, pitta, kapha. So our constitution, personal constitution, isn't designed to all be the same. That's why we all look different. That's why some of us are tall and thin, and some of us are really athletic and muscular, and some of us are short and stocky and have big bones or little bones or certain features. And these are all workshops that'll come up later or in my programs, which are in much more detail. Weak Agni. So when we talk about weak Agni, some of the things that come to mind are indigestion, a feeling of fullness or heaviness, bloating after a meal. So think of Thanksgiving. Like that's really the perfect one because you tend to overindulge, right? Like if you don't overindulge a little bit on Thanksgiving, like you're just not doing Thanksgiving right. But if you do that on a constant, like you constantly doing that, you're not only stretching out your your organs, your stomach specifically, but you're also causing a whole other cascade of events to happen. You're not creating enough space for your body to digest food, so it can't add the right liquids and acids to be able to digest the food. It also can create a lot of ama in the body, because if you, for instance, if you take a fire, so imagine a fire, and if you put the right stuff on the fire, so the right woods, the right kind of kindling, you have a really nice fire. Digestion is the same way. So we want to feed our digestive process the same way. We want to give it food that continues that subtle fire. And if we put too much, it can suffocate the fire. Just like if we put too much liquid in there, it can suffocate the fire. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later too. So we want to make sure that we're kindling this Agni. A feeling of fatigue after a normal meal. So if you feel tired after you eat, your digestive system is sluggish. You might not feel any other side effects, but if you actually feel tired, there's something going on. Newly developed food intolerances. So growing up with food sensitivities or allergies is one thing. So if you have a peanut allergy, pretty legit, like that's a real one. As you age, if you start accumulating sensitivities to food, likely there's something else going on, meaning your digestive fire isn't proper, something's not balanced right, you're eating the wrong food combinations, because we're pretty fussy on food combinations. There's things you just do not eat together. And it's funny changing some of the things, because Western looks at things very different. So it's taken into consideration that, this is a pretty old tradition, and it's kind of fun to experiment with some of the stuff. Once you know what you know, you can't unknow it. That's kind of my joke with my friends. Reflux and heartburn, gastritis. So that movement upward of vata and of the fire. And then undigested material in your stool. So these are all things that kind of show up. And there's a lot of other things that happen because of this kind of stuff. So these are the ones that can show up right away. So they're pretty quickly, where some of the other stuff like reproductive issues or PMS symptoms in women or menopausal symptoms can all be because you're not digesting food properly. So the digestive system, along with the lymphatic system, are the two systems we look at right away for things to see if there's something that's out of balance. That's why each dosha actually has an organ designated to that area. So the colon is vata, and the small intestine is pitta, and the stomach is kapha. And this is significant because if there's stuff showing up in those areas, then usually there's some imbalance in that particular dosha, which is how we look at illness. It's very different. It's fun because there's an actual like practical application to it and practical way to look at it. Okay, so things to strengthen your Agni or to actually douse out your Agni. So I'll talk about the things not to do. So the things not to do is to overload your stomach. So I talked about that. We want to make sure we're not eating too much food, that it creates digestive distress in any way. Another thing is when you eat when you're not hungry, so forcing yourself to eat. Now it's different if you're trying to get yourself on an eating schedule. So if I'm working with you and I'm trying to get you on a three meal a day eating pattern, there's probably a reason for it, because you're probably just snacking all day long. And that's not what we want to do, because our body tends to shut down certain parts of our system unless it has kind of a bit of time to be able to digest the food. And that will depend on your constitution, how fast your body burns through food too. But generally speaking, we say 3 meals a day, and we're kind of big on the whole, about 9-ish, noonish, and then 6-ish. So not eating any other times other than those times. When we start snacking in between, this is when we start to create issues with our digestive system, because it can't process the food completely. And we want our body to feel that sense of actual hunger. Now, if you're eating really late at night, you're going to feel probably, especially if your constitution is kapha, so if you tend to be bigger bone, bigger body, have a tendency to have issues losing weight, those are more kapha type tendencies. So you'll probably be full in the morning and not want to eat. And then sometimes we'll even kind of skip the noon meal and eat around 2 o'clock. And that really throws off the digestive system. So when I'm working with people, usually I'm working with women a lot, but when I work with people with weight loss, we look at this first and we start to slowly play with different things and then work on food and portion sizes, where in the morning, I wouldn't recommend like a kapha to eat a huge breakfast. They eat a smaller breakfast, just making sure they get something in so that they have consistent energy throughout the day. Where a pitta can have a pretty decent sized breakfast because usually their constitution can digest food very easily and they wake up very hungry. I'm one of those people, I just wake up and I'm just starving. So I have to wait a little bit because I like to get my practices in first. Having cold drinks. So drinking cold liquids will extinguish your digestive system. So if you really want to wreak havoc on your digestive system, drink a cold glass of water right before you eat. Then you can really mess it up. And if you're younger, like it's going to take more time to see some of the repercussions and depending on your constitution again. But the idea is to drink, I drink hot lemon water. So if I go out to eat, I always order hot lemon water, always. And I sip on that before, sip on it during. So you can sip on, but you don't want to take in too much liquid because again, the idea is that you want your digestive juices to be created to digest the food in your, well, to create the liquid in your stomach so that your small intestine can digest the food. Not much digestion happens in the stomach, not much. It's a storage place and where we mix our nutrients up and then the juices come in to be able to support that process. Also, chewing your food enough. We under chew and start putting water to be able to chew our food. We want our mouth to create that. It also helps for your the structure of your mouth and the structure of your sinuses if you chew your food. If you're constantly eating too fast and swallowing your food and not taking time to chew it, it's a disservice to your entire pretty much facial structure and the structure of your palate and your brain. There's been studies done on kids taking tests and chewing gum and that it can help them for test performance because it stimulates their brain. Like there's really cool stuff about chewing and the importance of chewing. So that being said, I'm not a huge supporter of all the smoothies, especially ongoing, like all the time, drinking them for most meals or drinking a liquid diet. Seasonally, there's a purpose for it. And there is a purpose for different reasons as far as if you're doing a cleanse or a detox or something like that, then there's a purpose for it. But if you're doing it every day, you again are doing a disservice to your body. But if you're doing it for all meals, that's where it comes into play. If you're just doing it for breakfast or something like that, it's not as big an issue, except for seasonally, it would be an issue in Ayurveda. And then eating when you're stressed out. So we can all experience this in some way, shape, or form when we're in a fight with our significant other, or we're in a fight with the person across the table, or having a really intense conversation. You may notice that your body doesn't want to digest the food very well, or you don't feel very good after, or you feel a little off or sluggish or something like that. That's because your body's stress system, so I talk about the fight or flight system a lot, has pushed all of your circulation out to your extremities for fight or flight. Because remember, our body doesn't know the difference between perceived stress and actual stress. The reaction is still the same. So it shuts down the digestive system when we're stressed. So make sure that if you get into a fight with somebody, that you take time to cool down. And if you're going to eat, take time to eat. But make sure that you're very mindful of that. And that's a whole nother topic. And then having too sedentary of a life. So we want to make sure that we're moving our body. And I'll go into that too right now, and then I'll go back into what you can do. So moving your body is really important. And of course, I'm going to be an advocate for yoga, but yoga is very beneficial because what does it focus on? It focuses on movement to the spine, twisting of the body, compression, opening up. So yoga is really the perfect exercise. I'm not going to say that walking and running and all those things are not good. They really are. It's just yoga does more. You get more boon for your buck is really what it is. So if you can start just a really basic yoga practice, super, super simple yoga practices, especially areas where you're either compressing and opening and twisting, just do a couple of those every day. And that right there will help. I do encourage more movement than that. I'm a big promoter of walking. Walking is another really beneficial exercise that I think is downplayed a lot because we assume that it's not exercise because we're not huffing and puffing and losing our mind. We want to make sure we're doing things that build our bodies. And as we age, going out and running your mind away is not necessarily the best way to process everything. And I know some of you use running as a tool to be able to manage stress. I get it. Like, I really get it. I was a long distance runner. I've ran the distances. So I get the stress management with it. But if it's the only one, what happens if you get injured? What do you fall to next? So make sure that you're doing different exercises to be able to promote both the activity and to promote digestion and lymphatic. So if you're a runner, highly recommend yoga, because yoga, there's nothing bad about yoga unless you do it really wrong or have a really intense class. But if you're doing compression movements and opening movements, you're moving your lymphatic system and also helping for your digestive system. Okay, what to do? So eat the same times each day. So as I was saying before, eating around 9, and that can be earlier. I'm not saying 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is kind of the cutoff time to not eat breakfast any later. Okay, around noon. So around noon, I mean about 11:30 to 1:30. Any later than that, our digestion actually starts to fade off significantly. So our digestion is best between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. So that's when we digest food the best. So think of the sun. We're the hottest in the middle of the day. Our digestive fire, because of pitta, is the hottest in the middle of the day. At the night, it's completely the opposite. It's a different effect. We're digesting our senses, the stuff we've taken in with our senses, and processing emotions and stress. So different process at night, but still a form of transformation and digestion. So digesting food during this time. If you eat enough at noon, you shouldn't be hungry and snacking in the afternoon. So a key to know if you're eating enough at your noon meal is that you shouldn't be hungry until supper time. Supper time should be not much later than 6 o'clock. I say 6:30 is still okay, because I get that coming home from work and then just going right into it can be a little more difficult, but this should not be the biggest meal of the day. So that happened after the Industrial Revolution. We went from farm communities to city-like structures, and we changed the eating time. So this is called lunch where I'm from, and this is called supper. Okay, so you'll hear me say supper a lot because I don't call this dinner. Our dinner was at noon. So in the city, we call it lunch and dinner, right? Dinner's the biggest meal of the day. So we want that meal to be in the middle of the day. When the Industrial Revolution happened, we pushed it to the evening because that was our family time, when the families could eat together, when the people would go, the parents would go and work. And so that would be the family time. And that's what happened, is that family structure happened at night. So if that is your family get together time, if you have family, then just make this a smaller meal and make sure you pack your lunches a little bit bigger at noon and get that full meal in at noon, because then you won't snack in the afternoon. And you can eat earlier. So if you eat earlier at 5:30, that's perfectly fine. Earlier is better because we want to go through a fast. So intermittent fasting is a huge Western thing that's just so cool and so new. It's not so new. We've been doing it since Ayurveda, which is written in the Vedas about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So it's been around for a while. Thing is that Western does it a little bit off the clock. So what they'll do is they'll eat a little bit later and then fast until noon. And this is where the problem comes. What's the name of this meal right here? Breakfast. Break the fast. So we want to eat that meal, even if it's small, to break the fast of the night. So we want that fast to come after our last meal. And then you should be able to get about 14 to 16 hours anyway of fasting. And this is the best time to fast too, because your body is trying to get rid of toxins, trying to get rid of things, versus putting a bunch of food into it right before it's trying to detoxify at a cellular level. So we really want to make sure we're pushing that time to eat earlier. Now, I know a lot of you struggle with snacking at night, and that has to do with dehydration and boredom and stress. Because some of us are snacky eaters or junk food eaters when we get stressed, and some of us don't eat at all. I'm a non-eater. When I get stressed, it's like my system shuts down. I do not eat. It's just the way that I'm structured. And so the other constitutions, specifically kaphas, tend to feed themselves with food. They fill the void with food. When they feel stressed, they eat food. When they feel emotionally stressed, they eat food. It's their comfort. And it's completely understandable. it's written in the Vedas, like we know about this. It's nothing new. So that comfort food thing and the mindless snacking of vatas happen during this time. They don't have the digestive systems to be able to overcome what can happen if they were to eat a little bit earlier. So we want to make sure we're eating our meal about that time and letting our body have some time to be able to digest it so that we can get to bed and go to sleep. So I got into fasting. So fasting regular would be what we would call intermittent fasting, which would be in this time right here. And then making sure that you're drinking hot to warm water. So warm water helps your digestive fire, but not drinking too much of it. A little tea is fine. I'm a big promoter of tea since I have a tea company, but I do recommend drinking tea. It's a nice way if you don't like drinking warm water. When I work with clients on their lymphatic systems, we do a lot of hot sips. So we drink hot sips throughout the day to be able to super hydrate the cells. There are cells in our body that are designed just to absorb water. And we want to make sure that they get fed the water that they need, because that's a whole cascade of events that can go sideways if we don't make sure our bodies are hydrated. And we tend to underhydrate in the wintertime, because we don't think we're thirsty, but our body's already dehydrated because our environments are extremely dry. The air outside is very dry. I mean, we are in very Vata winter right now. We're hitting it a little later than normal, but it's very Vata outside. The wind, the cold air, the dry air, the wind, it really affects our body and dries it out. So we want to make sure that we are creating as much moisture as possible, and then making sure that you're upping your oil intake too. So focus on ghee. Ghee is by far the best oil you can possibly consume, and it's clarified butter. You can buy it in the store now. I think you can buy it in the regular grocery stores. I don't shop in them, but I'm sure you can buy them there too. They'll probably be in the refrigerator, which is not where it has to be. It's pretty shelf stable, but highly recommend using ghee because it's a really strong digestive aid. So it helps to kindle Agni, so creating that digestive fire without creating too much fire. Plus it lubricates your body from the inside, so it can help for bowel movements if you're constipated. It helps your body. It feeds your body in a way that nothing else does. And that's a whole nother topic, because I could do a whole lecture on ghee. It's pretty amazing. And then making sure that you exercise regularly, so moving your body. All right. So the Chartaka says, let your diet be anything, but it should pass this test. It should protect health and prevent disease. So if you can say that your diet does that, you're probably doing pretty well. But this is where things start to get a little bit more technical as far as the food portions go. And I'm not going to talk about specific foods necessarily, because that is a whole nother part of this, but I want to keep it to the point where we're focusing on how to heal our digestive system, at least the basics. I have plenty of programs that wrap around this in private sessions to be able to work deeper. But the quality of your food is important. So make sure that your food is clean or organic. So as organic as much as possible. I usually recommend my clients look at the dirty 30 and the clean 16, because that's a good way to kind of figure out what is the really, really dirty produce and you should buy them organic, and what is the cleanest produce that you don't have to. Like asparagus, you don't have to buy organic. The asparagus produces its own gases that gets rid of bugs. Like it's a different thing. So there's some plants that do that naturally, that have their natural, and some plants don't have to be sprayed or anything like that. So we want to make sure we're eating as clean as possible. Your favorite foods should be organic, or at least non-GMO, as clean as you can get them. Timing. So we talked about meal timing, super important. You can eat the best foods in the world, the cleanest food, and still have issues because your meal timing's off. It is really the key. So I'd work on this first and then start working on the other steps. That's where I always recommend my clients start. Where your food comes from. So know where your food comes from. Certain areas use more chemicals than others. We use a lot of chemicals in the US, a lot. But if you can buy local, usually you'll have a proud farmer that's like, I don't use anything. So finding the local food is always the best. And then of course, eating seasonally. So seasonal foods means that there's certain foods that would be harvested either just before that season or during the season. So obviously the only thing we can harvest right now in Minnesota is snow and not recommended to eat because it's very vata in nature. So I would recommend that you look at foods that are deeply, deeply nourishing. So think of foods that nourish your body very, very deeply and were harvested probably in September, October. Yeah, that would be when they would be harvested in Minnesota. So think of apples and pears would be harvested late summer season. Any root vegetables, any ground type vegetables, any squashes except for zucchini. Zucchini is a summer squash. So the hard shelled squashes that would be able to be stored for long periods of time without rotting. Those are all foods that are very grounding and really good for the winter months. And then we start going into the spring and that completely changes things. So this is the season where we want to eat heavier, denser foods. And really, we should gain a little bit of weight. So gaining 3, 4, 5 pounds in the wintertime, not a problem because our body needs that insulation. Has anybody been outside? I have my chickens on a high fat diet right now. Like they get rice, but I'm putting bacon grease in their rice so that they hopefully gain a little bit of weight to be able to create some sort of barrier for them other than their feathers, of course. And it seems to be working because they're still laying eggs, which is phenomenal for February. But anyway, so eating heavier, denser food. So this is when we eat our grains because the grains would have been harvested in the fall. And we eat our meats. So meats, when is hunting season? In the fall. So this is the season that we would eat meat. So even in Ayurveda, we use meat as medicine, not as a main source of protein. We use a lot of other sources of protein other than meat. But this is the season when we would recommend, if you harvest meat, to have meat. Other seasons have their different variations of that. So food combinations. So we have foods that are incompatible with other foods. One thing is fruits. Fruit should not be eaten with anything else unless they're cooked. So it completely changes the constitution of them. Milk with fruit is very, very specific. So that's even worse than eating fruits. But milk with fruit, because what it does is it creates pretty much a digestive wine in our body and kind of basically rots. Like that's just the short fuzzy version of what it does in our body. Also milk with fish, legumes, tomatoes, with meat. So dairy kind of needs to be pushed to the side for other meals. Other than that, hot foods with cold foods. So eating a salad with a soup, very, very common Western food to have. Not a good food combination because the cold of the salad, which is completely the wrong season for it anyway in the wintertime, dampens the digestive fire, and then you put the soup on it and then it confuses the body. So soup, great. This is a great time of year to eat a lot of soup. That's what winter's for. And usually we tend to crave more of it. You might start to notice, if you're really sensitive to your tastes and what you want, you'll start to notice in the next few weeks, especially when you head into March, that you'll start to feel hungry for like salads and stuff that's starting to sprout and get green. And that's pretty normal. That means you're getting in tune to the cycle. Hot drinks with honey, alcohol, or yogurt. So not drinking anything that's too hot with honey. If you add honey to your tea, it's just a little tiny bit. I know meals are very, very common. So that's a coffee drink with honey. I would recommend not doing it unless you let it cool down a little bit and you add your own honey to it. If you can't drink it, it's too hot to put honey in. Honey becomes carcinogenic at about 120-ish degrees. So we want to make sure it doesn't, because honey is probably one of the most potent medicines that we have in Ayurveda, and we use it a lot to be able to use as a carrier. And then also it does completely the opposite of what you think, because it's sweet in taste, but it does completely the opposite. So it's really a good scraper for pulling out kapha in the body, which is fascinating. We call it a pravav. It means we don't understand why it does what it does, but it just does it. So we love honey a lot. Having the same amount of ghee and honey together, so an equal weight. So it's actually toxic, which is funny because I like to have a piece of toast with some ghee and then some honey on it, but I make sure that it's disproportionate so it doesn't create any issues. And again, why does it do that? We don't know. We can't explain that one. It just is something that's been written in the Vedas. And then cold foods in the wintertime. So I think I emphasized that enough. The cold foods in the wintertime, not good. Raw foods, not good. It really dampens the digestive fire. And we want that fire to be strong going into the spring, because those of us that are sensitive are starting to notice the accumulation of kapha. So maybe a little extra in our throat, sinuses. I got a feeling we're going to see quite a bit of like bronchitis and lung issues in the next few months. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of and letting our body melt out. So think of warm foods as melting things in your body, and cold foods creates a hardening in the body. If you think of it that way, it'll help you to be able to pick the right foods at the right time also. In preparation. So if you're preparing your own food, if you're preparing it when you're angry and you're just chopping stuff because you're pissed off, not the best way to prepare your food. Doing prayers before. So it doesn't have to be like a Christian prayer if you're not a Christian, but just honoring the food. So when I taught my teacher training classes, I did a prayer before that I said, thank you for bringing us all together. Thank you for the farmers who made the food, the animal that sacrificed its life, for the people that made it possible for this food to be at our table, the grocers and the, whoever was involved. And then for the preparation of the food and bringing it to the community. So I like to really honor the food, because really, if you think about it, we are very detached from our food and the process that it takes to be able to get it to our table, unless you raise your own. Like I raise a lot of my own food. My chickens make eggs. I eat eggs just about every day. I also harvest from my garden. So I do produce quite a bit of my own food, especially in the summertime. But for those of us that don't, again, be mindful of your food, because it doesn't just appear in the grocery store. And I've seen some really funny things posted about that from some of my practitioner friends. I'm like, really? So it'd be really interesting to be able to have classes next year in my yard to show people how to do gardening and stuff, because it's really pretty easy. It doesn't take a lot. And I don't do a lot of weeding. Everybody's always concerned about weeding. And I'm like, I really don't have any issues with it. So I think it's the way that I grow my produce. Knowing your surroundings, so your atmosphere that you're in. So if you're a working mother, and I'm just using mother as an example, but if you prepare the food, maybe eat your food before your family does. So if you're trying to switch your eating schedule, maybe think about eating, at like 5, and then maybe you feed your family later because you can't get them on your schedule, but you need to start taking care of yourself. So if you're the main cook and you prepare the meal, eat your meal in silence. There's nothing better than it. I live by myself. I have the luxury of being able to practice this to the best of my ability, but I get to sit at the table, eat my meal, look outside, watch my chickens, watch the squirrels, whatever's going on out there. But I get that luxury. But you can create that for yourself too. If there's a time that you can have some silence to be able to sit and eat your food, you'll learn to appreciate, and you'll be able to really nourish your body and get connected with your food, versus just stuffing your face and then wondering, and then eating again with your family. And then with your family, you can serve them the food, and then you can like sip on some tea or something like that to be able to still share the time with them, but maybe you're just not going to eat with them because they're eating, at 8 o'clock or something like that. And then you always have the choice. So making sure that you understand that it's your choice what you put in your body. We do have cravings, and sometimes the cravings are real and sometimes they're fake. And sometimes it's dehydration. So make sure that you're getting enough water. Often if you feel hungry, drink some water, some tea, and see if that's what you need first. And then if you're truly hungry, then figure it out from there. But as far as making, eating specific foods, like that's a whole nother topic. And it's so elaborate because knowing your constitution is a huge part of that. But this gives you a really good idea of what that is. Okay, so I'm going to go over the taste real quick. We have these 6 different tastes. And this is how we look at food. So we don't look at food as the nutrients that are in them. We look at them as the taste that they have. And if you're getting all of the tastes and then certain balances during certain times of the year, your body will be healthy. So we have sweet, sour, salty, which is the McDiet. We joke about that because McDonald's has mastered the sweet, sour, salty in their food. And that's why it helps to relax you when you feel stressed, because it has those contents in it. Not that they're good for you. I'm not promoting McDonald's right now. But what I'm saying is how they make their food, they've designed it specifically for stressed people in a hurry. Like they've mastered it. So in Ayurveda, we look at sweet, sour, salty very different. So we have sweet would be like carrots and some of the squashes. The butternut squash would be considered on the sweet end. Ghee, pastas, that kind of stuff is sweet. So we don't look at it as sugar. Sugar is a whole nother thing. Sugar is medicine. So we use jaggery, which is a form of sugar, and it's completely different. Honey is not considered the sweet, it's something else because we use it as medicine. So it's a little bit different in Ayurveda. Sour would be the obvious, lemons, buttermilk, tomatoes, sour apples would all fall in that. Tomatoes can go a little bit in the sweet because the heirlooms tend to be very sweet in nature, where the regular tomatoes tend to be more on the sour acidic level. Salty is obvious, the soy sauces and salt. The seaweeds can also be in that category, especially if they're coming from salty areas. Astringent. So astringent foods would be like legumes, pears, tofu, beans. Astringent is more of the spring type foods. Bitter. The fenugreek, the turmerics, the green leafy vegetables, fresh herbs. So a lot of herbs fall in that category. And then the pungents are more of the spices: black pepper, ginger, tulsi, cardamom, radishes, and chilies fall in there. So we've got the 6 tastes, and these 6 tastes depend on time of year. So this season is actually the sweet, sour, salty season. So get foods that are deeply nourishing sweet, add a little pinch of salt on there, and then have your lemon water in the morning. You've got your sweet, sour, salty. It doesn't mean you can't have any of the other foods. It means lean in that direction to help balance vata and to have your body be nourished during this season. And then it switches completely to the other half in the spring. And kappas hate spring eating because they love the sweet, sour, salty, or they love the sweet and the salty. And so the switch is usually a little bit brutal on them, where, like, for me, it's just like, oh, stringent, pungent, bitter, fine with me. But then we don't want to have those tastes in the summertime. They switch a little bit again. So that's a little bit about the tastes. And the thing is, we use food as medicine a lot. So I like to use herbs as a last option. Some herbs I'm pretty consistent with, like ashwagandha and stuff like that. I love ashwagandha. I think it's just a really beautiful herb, especially in the stressful environment we're in right now. It's just such a beautiful herb. But I usually go with spices and foods first. And then if they need herbs, especially if they're not a good eater, then I introduce a little bit of herbs with that. I mean, I'm talking about Ayurvedic herbs, not fresh herbs from your garden, because that isn't always available. Although some of them are, but more of the medical herbs. All right. Now I'll talk just a little bit about sattva, raja, and tamas. So these are the qualities of our food. So we have some foods that are extremely balancing, and we call them sattva or sattva. And then we have rajistic foods. So they help to increase fire and increase intensity in the mind. And then we have tamasic foods. So tamasic foods create a calming or subdue, and not necessarily in a good way. So usually it creates a lot more lethargy. And this is a huge thing too. And this is why we really lean toward a very sattvic diet, vegetarian diet, of course. But again, we use meat as medicine when it's necessary. So if we have a person that's low in iron, we can recommend eating meat. And that's usually when I eat my meat, unless it's fish. I do fish, but I'm pretty much a vegetarian diet now. I don't want the label because it's too much for me to deal with. I don't want to have to pin myself. I like the opportunities, but sattvic diet would be whole grains, fresh vegetables, ripe fresh fruits, nuts, seeds, legumes, dairy products, because we use dairy as medicine. So if you are lactose intolerant, actually lactose intolerant, completely different ballgame. But if you have lactose or sensitivity to dairy, it might be something wrong with your digestion. So it might be something that can be changed, or you're drinking cold milk. which is never a good idea. Dairy should never be drank cold. It causes a lot of accumulation of kapha. If anybody's drank a cold glass of milk and you go and you feel your sinuses and ears start to fill up, yeah, it's not an allergy. It's because you're drinking cold milk. So maybe consider drinking warmer milk. We use milk as medicine. So in the evenings, we'll make what's called golden milk, or yeah, golden milk. So it's got like turmeric and some spices in it. And that's actually really nice to have in the evening if you want a really beautiful like evening drink. It's really lovely, and it helps you sleep too because of the heaviness of the dairy. But I have recommended people use like almond milk for that too, because almonds have melatonin in it, so they can help a lot with that. And then spices, and then natural sweeteners like jaggery, honey, molasses, maple syrup are more sattvic in nature. So these are foods that really, really balance our body. And then we have the rajasic foods. So some of those would be like garlic and onions. And usually this is in the raw category more so than when they're cooked, because if you've ever had garlic, when it's not cooked, it's super spicy and intense. And when you cook it, it becomes very, very sweet. So there's some foods that change after you cook them. Hard cheeses, radishes, refined sugar, soft drinks, mustard, artificial sweeteners, stimulants of any kind would all be rajasic because they create intensity. So this can also create emotional imbalances. So when we see a lot of emotional imbalances in people, we look at, okay, what are you eating in your diet? Because maybe we need to introduce some more foods that create more of a sattva quality. And then tamasic foods would be mushrooms, vinegar, peanuts, meats, poultry, fermented foods, reheated meals, canned food, processed food, pre-cooked leftovers, leftover meals, that kind of stuff falls in there. So these are all things that create more lethargy. And it may be like, oh, I just don't feel like I have much energy. Well, what did you eat? Did you eat food that had life in it? Or was it in the refrigerator for a week, or even half the week? When I work with my clients, we talk about this a lot, and I have it down to a 48-hour rule. So you eat your food within 48 hours, and then by that time it's lost its vitality. And all depends on how many times you raise and lower the temperature of it too. But once the food's been cut, it's already changed into a lesser value than what it was before. And once it's been cooked, it's already been pre-digested. So we're big on cooked food, but lighter cooked the better. Soups are different because the energy stays in the pot with the food for a while. And I know sometimes soups are better the second day, like chili, hands down, the first day is not the best. Second day, the best chili, right? It has to get through the food, but that still falls within the qualities. Yeah. So we talked about the 4 keys: weakness, strength, what to do, what not to do, moving your body, 6 tastes, and then sattva diet. So that was a lot of information. And this is all stuff that I am breaking down into bits and pieces in this program that I'm creating. It's part of the Kickstart program and part of another program that I'm creating alongside. If you're a private client, you also get these you get the information also, because my private clients, I want them to get the information. And since I'm pre-recording all the stuff, you can watch it anytime, and it helps them along their journey, and then they can ask me questions. So yeah, this is breaking down some of the digestive stuff. Thank you. So I'm going to shut off the recording.